Joining me by phone, E.J. Graff, columnist for the American Prospect, where she writes about gender and sexuality issues, and author of What is Marriage For? The Strange Social History of Our Most Intimate Institution, which is an excellent book, and I recommend it, and I've given it as gifts. Hey, E.J., thanks for jumping on the phone with me.
Hey, Dan, I'm honored.
So you wrote about this case, and I've ranted and raved about this case, and all Americans, I think, need to be familiar with this difficult-to-pronounce name, Savita Halappanavar, who was an Indian, not American. She was an Indian woman who was traveling, who was in Ireland, I believe 7 months pregnant. Is that correct? When she
17 weeks pregnant.
17 weeks pregnant.
Less than 7 months. And I had the visiting business wrong. She and her husband were living there. He was working for Boston Scientific in Galway. And they had actually moved there from India because they heard Ireland was a good place to raise a family.
Not so much as it turns out. 17 weeks pregnant, Savita began to miscarry and went to the hospital where what happened?
They couldn't stop the miscarriage. She was in severe pain from the bleeding and other whatever else was happening. And after a day of miscarriage, severe pain, she started begging to have them induce the delivery, since they had already told her there was no way they could save the fetus. The fetus was going to die. And they refused to induce because that would be an abortion, because the fetus still had a heartbeat. So she continued in severe pain over 3 days to be miscarrying. And every time she begged, her husband said she was in agony. They kept saying, we cannot end this pregnancy because the fetus still has a heartbeat.
Fetus that they knew to be doomed.
The fetus that could not survive under any circumstances. They said, this is a Catholic country. And she said, I am neither Irish nor Catholic. They wouldn't change their minds. It wasn't a Catholic hospital, by the way. It was the standard hospital. And when the fetal heartbeat finally stopped and they removed the fetus, they took her to the ICU, and she died.
Of what?
Septicemia and complications from the 3 days of bleeding and miscarriage.
So because they refused to induce...
she died.
She died. So the doomed fetus that was never going to survive outside the womb died. And then the mother, this poor woman, after 3 days of agony and begging to be induced, she also dies.
Yes.
And Ireland has a very restrictive abortion law, kind of like the very restrictive abortion laws that right-wing politicians in America would like to bring to our shores, but has an exception for the life of the mother.
In theory, it is not really clear. There was several years ago, and I don't have the exact year, they had a ruling from the human rights courts in the EU. There was a young girl, very young, I think she was 14, who wanted to go to England to have an abortion and was threatening to kill herself if she had to carry the child, the fetus, to term. Ireland wouldn't let her travel because they knew the purpose, and it ended up going to the European Human Rights Court, and they said they have to have an exception for saving the life of the mother that would encompass that. But apparently there have never been guidelines issued, and so there's now an Irish inquiry, a government investigation into this, and one hopes they will issue these guidelines. But of course the deeper problem is that is how do the doctors know when they are following the guidelines? They were understandably concerned that they could be arrested for murder or abortion or whatever the charge would be if they saved the life of Savita, and then people said, someone later, some aggressive prosecutor said, she looks fine to us. It probably wasn't necessary.
So it was a moment where there was a conflict between the life of the mother, the life of the fetus was definitely still had a heartbeat. It wouldn't survive outside the womb, still alive. they looked at her and said, well, you haven't suffered enough, and you're clearly not dead yet, so we're going to err on the side of extending the fetal life of this baby that if born alive will die instantly, and erring.
No, it wasn't going to make it out. It wasn't going to make it. Yes, when faced with the choice between a fetus that had no future, it wasn't even a choice between one life and another life. It was a choice between a non-life and an actual life. They decided that
they murdered an adult woman because they wouldn't allow her to make her own choices around her own medical care.
They refused to save the life of a woman who died because she could not have her pregnancy terminated.
And if they had terminated her pregnancy when she asked, she would be alive today.
No one can say that. She certainly could have gotten an infection anyway, but that would have been the standard of medical care. So, I mean, you can't prove the negative, but she certainly would have had a better shot.
Okay, let's rant and rave about this. What is the takeaway here for American women and American men? The husband is also now widow, traumatized by this experience. What's the takeaway here in this country where right now women have, except in states where they've made abortion effectively illegal, women in most places have the right to terminate their own pregnancies, to make their own choice. But what's the takeaway as people listen to the debate, coming from legitimate rape party, the party of rape as a method of conception, the party of more anti-choice bills in the last 2 years than we've ever seen in history before. What's the takeaway for American men and women from this case?
Let's take a look around the world just for a second first. It is very hard to talk about. It still makes me want to cry just when I think about the facts of it. Savita's death was definitely medieval. It came from this ideology that the idea of human life is sacred. And the ideology was so strong that erased the reality of an actual human life. The problem I have with the quote-unquote pro-life movement, and I do respect many people who believe that life is a sacred thing. I respect that position. But when you have that idea so strongly, it can erase the facts of human life in which everything is messy and complicated and risky and unpredictable, and it doesn't take into account. People like to say the world isn't black and white. In between, there's gray. There's not gray. There's a lot of color in between. And in this case, the color was blood. The color was red, and this woman bled to death for the idea that human life is always sacred, and we human beings should not interfere with some idea of what the divine intends. So just to look around
not just that, but the idea that if there's a conflict between non-viable fetal life and an adult human female, that you err on the side of favoring non-viable fetal life over that adult human female.
That you do not end what is a non-viable life. Correct. So here's another story. Over the summer, there was a Dominican teenage girl, a 16-year-old, who had leukemia, and they have a human life amendment. Life begins at conception under their constitution, and so she was refused chemotherapy. Then she started to bleed, and they refused to terminate that pregnancy too. She miscarried, and she also bled to death. That is what the human life amendment says. It says that pure, innocent potential for life, not even actual extant life, but potential for life, is more important than the actual breathing, walking around, complicated person. And I have trouble talking about it.
I do too. Like, there's a moment where we should just have 3 minutes of silence where we can all just think about this and let it sink in. You literally get to a place where there are no words.
Yes, even though you and I, it's our job to have words for the unwordable. So Joe Walsh this summer said that these circumstances don't exist, that medical science can always preserve both the mother and the fetus. who was defeated by Tammy Duckworth.
Right. Joe Walsh, who was a U.S. congressman and a teabagger. I thought for a second you said Joan Walsh, who was the editor
not
of Salon.
Joan, no.
No, Joe Walsh, teabagger, ranting, anti-choice congressman who said that this doesn't exist anymore, that there are never moments where you have to make a choice between the life of the fetus and the life of the mother because medical science has reached this point where
it can do anything.
It can do anything,
and
that both lives can always be saved.
Body. Yeah.
And people need to pay attention. You know, when Todd Aiken went out there and said the female body has ways of shutting that thing down when a woman is raped, what they're saying is if a woman has been raped, she can't be pregnant. So if she's pregnant, she wasn't raped. Therefore, you don't need a rape exception.
Right. Witches don't float, you know, Dan.
Right. So if the woman drowns, she wasn't a witch.
Exactly.
So when people think they're being moderate on choice, and the right has worked very hard to move the center on choice, if they say, I'm against abortion except to save the woman's life or in cases of rape, that in practice results in women dying.
Correct. And pro-life people are going to say that that's never what they meant to happen, right? The pro-life people that I know say they are actually in favor of abortion to save the life of the mother. But without safe abortions, real women really die. And sometimes they die, like those two cases, the Dominican teenager and Savita in Ireland. But those are the rarest ones. They are easiest to grieve over. Other people die because they're going to do the riskiest possible thing in order not to give birth. I had a friend who ran an abortion clinic for many years, and she did it really to save lives. She did save lives because she knew that if these women did not have safe abortions, they would either try to do it themselves or they would kill themselves. She said she ended up with a lot of women who came to her door saying, if I can't get this done here, that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill myself. And she says they were serious. And yet she had a father come in. She had a 14-year-old who needed an abortion. I don't know what happens to these 14-year-olds. Yes, I do. You know what happens to them. They have been abused or they have been raped. And so this one was pregnant, and they were in the middle of giving her an abortion, and her father came in and tried to get past the security guards it was hard. They were holding on to him, and they were telling him that the stage of the procedure, I don't know the medicine well enough, but this is what my friend told me, the stage of the procedure was such that if he got in there and ripped the instrumentation out at that moment, which is what he was trying to do, the child would die. And he said, I would rather see her dead than have an abortion. And what kind of religion is that?
Well, that's the pro-life movement in a nutshell. They would rather see you dead than have an abortion.
Not all of them. Honestly, not
all. But no,
when
it comes to practice, when the rubber meets the road, when it's not some abstract debate about life, when it comes down to reality, women die in places where abortion isn't safe and legal and a woman doesn't have a right to make her own choice. If Savita had the right to make her own choice, and she attempted to make her own choice, and her choice was respected, and the medical care that she requested was provided to her, she would very likely still be alive today.
Her husband's interviews are just heartbreaking. He says if we had been in the UK or in India, she would be alive and she could have more babies. That was their goal.
Oh.
It makes it. I mean, the wonderful thing is that there are protests going on in Ireland, and perhaps this case will be able to be used to really force them to reevaluate their policies.